I think most people already have an opinion about raccoons. They're clever, they're mischievous, they get into garbage cans. They somehow always seem to be where they're not supposed to be. And because raccoons are so common, I just never really thought about them much. Then I started to learn about them, and as it turns out, I was missing a lot. One of the most famous things that people probably know about raccoon is that they wash their food, except they might not. Raccoons have incredibly sensitive front paws. In fact, they rely on touch so heavily that some researchers think the famous food washing behavior may actually help them gather information about what they're holding. They have difficulty actually seeing as well. They might actually be a little bit blind. What I mean by this is just that during daylight, they actually lose a lot of their perception of sight. They can still see, but it's kind of like when you're wearing your glasses and when you're not. During the night, they can see perfectly fine. But during daylight, it does tend to get a lot more blurry for them, and so it's harder to analyze what's in front of them. But this does make them excellent hunters, especially at night. But that actually brings me to another thing that they do that's very fascinating. They don't forget things. Like, not as quickly as you might think, at least. They tend to actually remember things really, really well, specifically solutions. When it comes to like opening containers or navigating a neighborhood or finding reliable food sources back to back, they seem to remember these like clockwork. It's why you'll find the same raccoon harassing the same trash cans over and over again. It's because they end up finding food in those same trash cans repeatedly. So they obviously understand somewhat how they can get food reliably then. And I think that's another interesting thing. Raccoons' only real massive success is partially because of humans. They would not be so plentiful or in such high densities if it wasn't for human intervention. Us throwing away a lot of food and garbage and so on has actually helped them spread massively. We not only provide them access to leftover food, but they also steal pet food, compost piles, trash, and they also use a lot of our unnatural infrastructure as shelter. So it's kind of surprising how much they kind of weirdly depend on us, but they are not domesticated by us. But I digress. Another thing about them is that they are not just nocturnal. Many people actually believe they are strictly nocturnal, but they're primarily nocturnal, also known as crepuscular. I'm gonna be honest, I think I butchered that pronunciation, but you understand what I mean. Some of the biggest reasons you might see them during the day, especially healthy raccoons, is usually because of urban populations, searching for food at specific hours. Say when a restaurant is closing in the middle of the day, they throw out their food scraps, raccoon goes and retrieves them. Pretty basic principle. Or mothers with young relocating between areas. Those are some of the most common reasons that you might see a raccoon during the daytime. They are more active during those nocturnal times. Suddenly the raccoon isn't just a fuzzy burglar anymore. It's an animal experiencing the world in a very different way than we do. The more I learn about them, the more I realize the raccoons aren't really even urban animals. They're just very adaptable animals. Long before they were opening trash cans and rummaging through your garbage. They were exploring riverbanks and wetlands. And honestly, I think that's where things get really interesting. A raccoon doesn't exist by itself. To understand a raccoon, you have to understand what it eats. It eats crawfish, frogs, insects, berries, and honestly, a lot of other opportunistic things. But those are some of their favorites. Once you start looking at what raccoons can eat, you start learning about the places that those animals live in. Wetlands, streams, forests. I think what surprised me the most was learning that raccoons don't just consume nature, they help shape. Every berry eaten by a raccoon has the potential to become a future plant somewhere else. Looking at this footage, I don't really see a raccoon anymore. I see a species connected to the wetlands, to forests, to amphibians, to insects, to plants, to even its own predators. And that's why I think about learning about these ecosystems is so important. Not because every species is rare, not because you'll become an expert, because every species you learn about becomes a doorway to something larger. One thing I did notice while learning about raccoons is how often people talk about them as if they're just one step away from just being a pet, like your typical cat and dog. And honestly, I can kind of understand why. They're intelligent, they're curious, they use their hands in ways that seem eerily human. There are countless videos online showing raccoons interacting with people, accepting food, solving puzzles, behaving in ways that make them seem almost domesticated. But there is an important distinction here that I don't think many people are considering. A raccoon might become tame, but that doesn't mean domestication. Those two things aren't inherently the same. A tame animal is an individual animal that has learned to tolerate or trust human beings. A domesticated animal is the result of generations of selective breeding by people. Dogs are domesticated. Cats are domesticated. Cattle are domesticated. Raccoons are not domesticated. And I think there's an important distinction there because it changes how we think about them. When we look at a raccoon and see something that behaves a little like a dog or a cat, it's easy to assume it's basically the same thing, but it really isn't. It's still a wild animal shaped by thousands of years of evolution to survive in forests, wetlands, streams, and countless other environments. In fact, one of the things that makes raccoons so fascinating is that they haven't needed domestication to just live alongside us. They've adapted on their own. They learned how to navigate our cities, our neighborhoods, our parks, our farms, without becoming dependent on human beings in the same way that domesticated animals have. They aren't failed pets. They're a wildly successful wild animal. And I think understanding that makes them even more interesting. The goal shouldn't be to imagine raccoons as a future pet. The goal is to appreciate them for what they already are. A species that has managed to thrive. A species that has managed to thrive in a rapidly changing world while remaining fundamentally wild. To me, that's just far more impressive than domestication. But I digress. There's a lot of talk around this whole domestication of raccoons thing. Some of the studies cited are okay. The most we've seen is some mirroring of essentially what we call domestication, but that doesn't really mean anything. It's kind of pop science, and I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole from here, I'll be honest. But if you have your own take on it, or maybe some information that I don't have, feel free to leave it in the comments. I'll be happy to read through it and even discuss with you. That being said, I think another fascinating thing about raccoons that I feel people don't really actually acknowledge that much, raccoons are actually capable of something called delayed implantation. After mating, the fertilized embryo doesn't always immediately implant itself into the uterus. development can be paused for a period of time before pregnancy truly begins. This allows births to occur during a more favorable time of year when resources are plentiful. A lot of mammals do this, actually. Bears, weasels, some forms of seal. So it just kind of goes to show that something even as basic to us as reproduction turns out to be a little more complicated than most people realize. Raccoons aren't simply reacting to their environment. They've evolved strategies that help synchronize their birth with the seasons and the rate at which they can gather resources. I think that's insanely useful and something that I think even us humans wish we could do, which does actually bring up another thing that I didn't really think about until more recently. Raccoons have culture. Not in the human sense, but local populations can develop different habits and problem-solving techniques than ones from other populations. A raccoon growing up in a city may learn completely different behaviors than ones growing up near wetlands or forests. Young raccoons learn from their mothers, meaning knowledge can efficiently be passed between generations. So when a raccoon figures out how to exploit a new food source, or navigate a human environment, those behaviors get spread locally. A raccoon isn't just born knowing how to survive in a city or the wetlands. Much of that knowledge is learned and passed down from its family. Sometimes they're just sitting in front of a trail cam eating at a food block. Honestly, I'm just glad that you were here to listen to me ramble about something I learned today. I think raccoons are really interesting, and I think a lot of other people don't really consider animals or insects or their ecosystem to be that fascinating, and I don't know why that is. So I want to inspire you to be more curious about these things, and I hope this helped. I don't know. And worst case scenario, you got to learn something new. Have a good one. Stay safe out there. Please don't forget to like the video. It lets me know that you enjoyed it. Watch time and likes are probably the two most important things to YouTube. Subscribe if you want to see the next video. Yada yada yada. You know, the typical spiel. But I care about you. You should care about nature. Get out there. Learn some stuff. Okay, bye.